more diversity delivers more, you know, in every respect. And I think you've demonstrated beautifully the unknown side of foraging that many of us, and I alluded to it in what I said, delivery, because I really worry when our sheep are out in the sunlight without shade, and I also worry that they're not that they're only able to access the food that we put in front of them, and there's no selection on their part. It's our humans' part. So I think what you're saying is dead right. My biggest problem is, and what we've done at our farm is we've planted just over 10% of our total land now with trees since we've been there. The difficulty for us is that in a cropping situation, getting the trees into the cropland, cultivated land, is very difficult, and even to get shade is difficult, just because of the lie of the land in many cases. So I would love to go down that road. I wish I had another 50 years of life, because even with birch and fast-growing species, you're talking a good number of years, aren't you? I guess most farmers would see that as a short-term problem. So it's a long-term solution, and it's definitely the right solution. I mean, you mentioned tannins. There are one or two forage plants. I think Sam mentioned tannins in Sandfoil and Burstwood trefoil.
Sure.
And there are other plants. I mean, in Scandinavia, for example, fireweed contains larger tannins, which are really, really complex tannins. You know, we think the tanniferous plants here are complex, but some of these other plants that we haven't yet looked at are even more interesting from a biochemistry point of view. And I think I wish other people had your knowledge. I just think what you've said is really interesting for animal health, and well-being. You've said it all.
Okay. Paul. A question really. Do sloes, are they high in tannins?
Well, all trees
Because
have
interestingly
tannins.
enough, we've got jerseys, and I quite often see them actually, they'll pick the sloes off the bushes. Which I sit there and watch them because it's just amusing. And then actually they'll pick them off when they're kind of semi-ripe.
Yeah, but there's another plant that's quite similar to a sloe, isn't there? Is it bullace? Is that what it's called?
Bullets, yeah.
Bullace, yeah.
Yeah, but some of it is bullace, because it's a mixture of sloes and bullace. And interestingly enough, although I know you probably haven't got too many hedgerows, but we were just border on the edge of the Cotswolds, and someone in their wisdom, they probably didn't realise at the time, have actually planted most of our dry stone walls with bullace and sloes either side. And so most people fence all their hedgerows off.
Yeah.
I'm very much of the mind, well actually the cows do quite a good job at keeping the hedge in trim.
Yeah.
And it gives them access to go in and graze whatever in their head.
Yeah.
But it is quite amusing to watch these cows just picking the berries off.
Yeah. Yeah, well, quite often people say that cows don't have the dexterity. They do have some, however, and they are capable of selecting some feed. Yes, rose hips. Yeah. But one of the downsides I didn't mention actually was physical defences that plants have against animal, and of course thorns, particularly blackthorn, then becomes a bit of an issue. And if you have these blackthorn hedges, then you'll most likely see
Probably why they prefer
infected puncture wounds. Yeah.
If you were to give us some advice, with farms that haven't got either hedgerows or trees for shade or grazing, what would you plant, and realistically, how quickly do you think? In other words, how long do you need to fence it for before it could be used without damaging it?
Add to that as well.
Yeah.
What wouldn't you plant as well? Anything you would definitely stay away from that we might need to know about?
Well, I mean, clearly poisonous trees. Yew, box are out of the question. But I would actually say that a mix of trees is more important than a particular tree. Again, diversity. Each tree is different. They give different properties. Some have more upright growth. Some might be better for shelter from the wind, in terms of as a shelter belt in combination with shrubs. Others may have better benefits as a canopy against sun and rain and the cold. I think what to plant should also be determined by what you have as land and as problems. So if you're in a high wind area, shelter belts are clearly somewhere to start, but also what you want to do with things. Maybe you have an end goal in sight for the trees themselves. So do you want to be harvesting the trees? Do you want them as tree fodder, but do you also want to be harvesting the wood at a later date? And I read a paper the other day entitled Universalisation Without Globalisation. So finding ways of, in a way, finding truths that work on a local level, but really do work for you, and with it, that requires knowledge and plans.
Because recently we've got some fairly historic parkland, and I think if you want to go and see what animals like, go and see what they're doing in Grace Parkland, some of the historic stuff, because the trees in there, really got the image in those in the chestnuts, and I think you can learn a lot through that.
Yeah, you certainly can. Yeah, I mean it's quite extraordinary. You know, I was reading some of the Doomsday Book, where trees are reported in really great detail because they were so important for the animals back in the day, and landowners had to provide trees sufficient for winter forage, and they were guarded. They had sheriffs that made sure that other people didn't steal the fodder from the trees.
I think there was I think it was on TV not so long ago, a few months ago, about holly, and there's some particular holly varieties that are Prickles, and they reckon they came from the selection of winter forage.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, if you're coming to the ORFC in January, I'll be taking some samples with me of some holly, where, yes, holly does produce prickles, but it tends to produce them only up to browse height. So it's to the point where they're predated, and if you look further up the tree, you'll see there aren't any prickles on the holly except for just the final point.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Fascinated by the comment about alder, because of course being a nitrogen fixing species, it starts to make you think about design and about its species.
Yeah.
And in many tropical systems, there's a lot of nitrogen fixing trees used for browsing. So I'm just wondering what opportunities actually that sort of affords. And I know people don't tend to talk about tree breeding, but
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Yeah, and in a way that refers back to the work that you have been doing with sandfoin, and some of the stuff that Linda, is that? Lydia
Smith.
Yes, has been doing with condensed tannins and understanding the properties that they have. Yeah, so that we can breed for those properties in the future.
The other thing on the condensed tannin project, on the condensed tannins point, was just to say I think there was a session on the Relax project somewhere in the conference, but within the Relax project, which is RELACS, which is a new EU project, one of our colleagues, Virgila Athanasiou, if I can get the pronunciation right, Greek colleague, is doing a lot of work on chicory within that project, which is about looking at alternative inputs in the organic standards, and there are some farmer groups working within that, so if people are interested in that, it's worth doing that.
Yeah.
I'm sort of the idea of being livestock. Currently in farm that I'm working on, our issue is that we have to fence off all our roads because they're so capital. Is there support for introducing interplanting, or how would you recommend going about this?
I can direct you towards people who know.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm afraid.
I'll give you some. Are you in England? Right. There is some aid under countryside stewardship. If you've got a mid-tier scheme going, or thinking of one for gapping up, which pays for gapping up and for fencing, and I think we'll find a one-off grant next year by Natural England again under mid-tier for specifically hedgerow management, so gapping up and coppiting and stuff like that. So there are grants available for that. very items. And I think the only requirement is that you plant with a mixture of native species. Peter?
There's
But, I mean, what another thing which is more common is sort of biomass boilers and willow growing for this. Do you know any examples of this being integrated into livestock? Because the
Yes.
discussion I see as well is, you know, taking land out of production for food to grow fuel basically, which is a bad thing in itself, but can the two be integrated? The same with this week's report, government report. We should have less sheep and more trees. I think the livestock industry will do well incorporating these things to say, well, we can actually do both and both
Yeah.
benefit.
Yeah. Yes, in some ways it can happen. There was some work done in Denmark with pigs and biofuels. So the pigs were foraging and they were being fed in these areas, but they were being kept in outdoor pens, but they were well sheltered. And in many ways it reflects the original environment of pigs. So yes, it can be done. But of course they do eat. They also eat. So you have to be careful of managing. Yes, carefully it can be done. But again, you know, that comes back to why do you want the trees? What are the trees there for in the first place? And then working out how to combine animals with the trees. If they are only there for the animals, well, of course they still need to be managed, because browse, if browse is an important feed, then you have to make sure that the plant can recover. So you certainly don't want more than, or a heavier than 50% browse, because it takes the tree too long to recover.
Yeah, one of the well, it's not a big problem, but the things I've observed, I got some big oak trees, and the cattle go under there for shade. But then, you know, their droppings all go there, and then grass there grows very quick and long, but it's sour.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, so in a way it's a bit of a problem. They won't eat it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if that mud was distributed, you know, throughout the field, it would. Yeah. But I don't see any way of.
No, but this is the thing though. It's teasing it back. So the animals are benefiting from having the trees there. They're seeking the shelter, shade in some way.
Yeah.
The problem is there's too little of it, because they're spending too long in that one place. So it's become an issue for you, but it's also actually an issue for them. Having too little shade.
Yes. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. Let's think about that.
Need more trees.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Is
right,
the
more
answer.
trees.
In your parkland, that's what that's saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
I haven't really formulated my question, but it was about pigs and their management. Have you done any studies, and are you aware of any like we have had pigs around trees and they just kill the trees off? And things like that. So is there any way or advice you can give to me with that?
Pigs and trees are difficult, and they have to be managed very well. There is a farm in Sweden that uses pigs to regenerate woodland, and they use them very specifically to do that. So they go in and they fell the trees that they want, that they want to harvest, and then they let the pigs in. And what the pigs do is effectively rotivate. So they activate seedlings. They never have to replant. All of the seedlings are natural regeneration, and then they move the pigs on. So that's one way of using them. The thing about pigs is to understand that in a natural forest situation, pigs will bark uppermost roots of trees. And when those trees are established, it doesn't matter that much, but the benefits to the woodland is that it starts to inhibit the uptake of nutrients on a surface level, which allows young saplings to gain a better hold. So in the grand scheme of things, the pigs are of benefit to a woodland situation.
Not necessarily
problems come when there are too many pigs and too few resources again. So, I mean, it's trying to get the balance right, and maybe the only way to do it is to protect those trees, but to allow them access to the leaves. Yeah. And, you know, in places like Brazil, leaves are being used to fill sows up with. Leaves from, for example, hazel trees are not that good for in nutritional terms, but they provide a good amount of bulk. So if you want to feed a sow while she's pregnant, then you can fill her gut with something like that, so she's not looking for food or not getting too obese. Yeah, so it's sort of tailoring things.
What's the tree with the leaf with the highest amount of protein and nutrition value?
Mulberry.
Mulberry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but establishing mulberries hard work.
Yes. But that was just to indicate that, you know, they compare extremely well to traditional.
Right.
Yeah.
Marty.
It's getting really exciting because the sense of whole and nature's cleverness is really coming out. And so my question, it started, I wanted to go back to the alder, and I was, as a nitrogen fixing tree, is the unpalatability actually because the tree will then be playing its part in nature's, that's the question, is that, see what I'm saying? And because you then moved on to talking about actually options for breeding trees, which maybe would do both. But then I wanted, it got into the sense of whole, yes, you have to restrict or control the grazing of browsing of trees in the same way, which is back to a question, because I came in late, so back to not grazing or holistic management, whichever, you're actually allowing nature to recover, which is what Ansadia was saying, the animals move on and they don't come back for a long time, so
Yeah, and this works really quite well for cattle who typically show sort of camping behaviour. You know, they'll stick around. In terms of managing their own world, they're actually quite good at doing it. So, for example, they'll graze and they'll lie down where they've grazed, and they deposit most of their faeces after a lying bout. So they're limiting their own risk of getting any disease through their own faeces, and then they'll move on and graze elsewhere. So you get this sort of, they'll stay within a space for a few days and then decamp. And it looks to us perhaps like it's unstructured, but actually in the grand scheme of things it works very well as a system.
I just think on that point of, really quickly, on that point of natural behaviour, as Paul's saying actually, with the orchard we planted at Honeydale, we were putting guards around trees which were barely over the top of the guards, and the guards were probably 5.5 feet, weren't they really? So from a sheep point of view, they couldn't really see there was anything in there, and yet within a day or two they were climbing up and having a look. You know, so it took them very long to work it out until it was unbelievable. But there wasn't big branches hanging out over the guards. But they were inquisitive enough to find it. Amazing.
Time for one more. Last one. Christy.
I was just looking at Martin with his wholeness idea and coming back to pigs, and you talked about pigs in willow, but there's also some really neat stuff going on in Denmark about pigs in poplar.
Yes.
And they're designing agroforestry systems where the pigs have access to mature poplar at kind of one end of the paddock, as it were. And it changes the behaviour of the pigs. It changes the amount of time they spend in the hut, out the hut, in the trees. They're getting shade from the trees. The trees can absorb any ammonia that's volatilised. You also get a change in the pattern of the sort of dunning and urination patterns of pigs. So it's this whole kind of system where you're getting a behavioural shift, which actually could, designed in the right way, and I mean, there are still some issues with this, you could also limit some of the adverse effects of outdoor pig production in terms of the amount of things like nitrate leaching. So it's back to your point, that there is work going on to look at how you design these systems.
Yeah,
which I think is really exciting.
this is a farmer that's doing this, isn't it? Because if it is, I've looked at his system, which is really quite exciting. But so far he's only given access to the trees for the piglets, because the sows do quite a lot of damage.
This is a piece of work done at Aarhus University.
Okay.
It's I examined the PhD, which is how I know it's never made it. The student of John Hermanson's.
Yes.
But it is they put plots onto a commercial farm.
Yeah, it sounds very like this
And
farm.
it may be the same farm, I don't know.
Yeah.
They've just published a couple of papers and there's some really good stuff.
Oh, nice.
There's a whole other tranche of students going into the systems.
Yeah.
It's quite exciting.
Yeah.
They are organic as well.
I can send you a link. Yeah. Catch me and I'll send you a link.
I'm sorry, we've run out of time. So thank you very much to our speakers. I think we've had a fascinating romp through
That's
this
left of field, was it?
diversity. From what Ian's up to at home with his, let's call it a demonstration farm education centre. I think we'll all be heading for the Cotswolds.